Okay, so I am sitting here with Dr. Jennifer Olsen, and you, Jen, said I should describe you as an experienced epidemiologist who serves as executive director of the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregiving, RCI, which promotes the health, strength, and resilience of caregivers throughout the United States. So now I'm going to read what your bio actually is, and we're going to have a laugh at how much what you wanted me to say versus what I'm going to say proves why you are the perfect wing woman to Mrs. Carter, because you clearly also live the values of brevity and humility, which I think is why so many of us adore you. You're a public health leader with nearly 20 years experience developing and operationalizing concepts in government and philanthropy. And in that time, you've managed global partnerships that have brought to life super impactful health strategies and programs. And right now you work with former First Lady Rosalynn Carter to strengthen and support the 40 plus million family caregivers in the US. And I would argue, and I think you would agree, that the number of COVID caregivers has at least doubled that number in one way or another in the last month. So building on that and relevant to this very moment today, you developed partnerships and managed the pandemics portfolio at the Skoll Global Threats Fund. And while you were there, you launched a cross-sector program providing volunteers with the technology to report health threats faster. And this program was featured on the BBC, created policy changes, and saved the Northern Thailand government millions of dollars. Rock on, sister. When you were at HHS, you launched the Fusion Cell to increase awareness and information sharing during emergencies. And other previous roles included working with the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, EMS Corporation, and Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, which I want to say makes me feel enormously inadequate going through that. But I know the reason why you only wanted me to read one line is you don't ever want anyone to feel badly because you are super kind, which is another one of your extraordinary strengths. So I have to kick off by asking, and I think this is the greatest demonstration of the path that your life has taken. Why are you and I doing this on a Saturday morning instead of Friday at 11 a.m. when it was originally scheduled?
Well, that's because I live in Plains, Georgia, rural Southwest Georgia, and our internet is challenged at times, especially as all my neighbors get online. So I appreciate the flexibility in finding the windows where we can function via video from here.
And tell me quickly, why is everyone online? Are they doing schoolwork? Are they?
Oh no, they're playing their games. Most of my neighbors are 70 plus, so we don't have the schoolwork burden that so many communities do. But everybody is, doing their activities.
Candy Crush.
That's right.
Which I love. All right, so you went from living and working in San Francisco on global health, doing all this super sexy international public health stuff. And then realized you were needed to help with the family caregiving situation. So you took a sabbatical, you spent a year in North Carolina with your family. Most people would have then gone back to San Francisco. You moved to Plains, Georgia, which is a population of 700. 700 that can crush the internet with Candy Crush. 2.5 hours outside Atlanta. Why?
Because in my year of spending time with my family and watching caregiving happen. My mom was caregiving for my grandmother, my dad caregiving for my uncle. I felt like caregiving was a journey for which there was not very much information. There wasn't very much support. I would jokingly say I thought I was pretty good at using the Google. I could find solutions for anything, especially a health thing. Why couldn't I find it? And I realized that my family's journey was not unique. My family's journey was not unusual, and that there were so many people who were struggling with all aspects of caregiving. And then I had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Carter, and as you know, once that happens, you're kind of under her spell. So
yeah, it's over.
Here I am. That's right. That's right.
Life. So you cared enough then about caregiving after this experience and after Mrs. Carter seduced you, as she does all of us, to move to Plains, Georgia, and to work alongside her. This was before COVID. This was, in the end of 2018, I think, fall of 2018. Mm-hmm. How has that passion for caregiving intensified since in the last month, let's say?
I would say in a few ways. The first being, it showed me all the ways that caregivers are critical to our public health system, right? Caregivers have to do the work of making sure somebody takes all their medicine so they don't show up at the ER because of their diabetes during this time when we need those hospital beds for other people. We need caregivers to take care of that person who has a mild COVID experience at home so that they don't need to be in a bed somewhere else.
Yeah.
We need caregivers to make sure people have their, food and their bandages changed. So if a home care worker doesn't have to go into that house. And so caregivers are so critical in any disaster or tragedy or experience, but this just intensifies that. And so I am every day trying to think about that intersection of I'm a caregiver and I've got this crisis going on.
Yeah. It's an unfortunate positive to this incredibly difficult time is it is really shining a light, a beautiful light on the role that these humans, that caregivers are playing. So
That's
Plains,
right.
Georgia is 45 minutes from Albany, Georgia, which has been in the news a lot for a really hard reason. It's in the county that has the highest COVID-related deaths per capita in the US. What happened there?
There were 2 funerals that happened about a month and a half ago, and there were individuals who attended those who had COVID. And so a number of the participants at those events got sick, passed away. The community, like many communities, I think was hearing about COVID cases in the news, but didn't realize it was going to be here so soon or here yet. And so I think there's just been a big increase in cases and kind of just this recognition that the disease is here now, and what can we do about it?
So I read this quote yesterday, together we are in different boats, which I think is an important riff on this notion we're all in this together. And you talk a lot about not just the distinction between big cities and rural. In our mind, we're like, well, there's big cities, and then there's rural. And you say, and you remind us all that within the rural population, there are such differences as well. For example, in your own town, you put up a sign, a beautiful sign, I hope you share it as part of this later, that said, social distancing is a tremendous act of generosity and solidarity. We are not sick, but we've been traveling. We are not accepting visitors because we love this community and want to do our part to keep Plains healthy. If you are scared or at risk, we'll go to the store for you. We're all in this together. How did you get to that wording? Did it work? And for all of us who are trying to figure out how to communicate about COVID across populations, what did you learn?
I came to that sign because I first did a bit of a listening session with my team. I have a team of 10 staff who are all of them local to the community. And something I learned in Thailand and some other places was that I need to understand and learn kind of the approach that people have to think about the best types of interventions, right, in any kind of health system. And so I heard a lot of confusion, and I thought, okay, well, maybe a sign that explains why I'm doing what I'm doing will be helpful. Maybe coming from a place of faith. One thing I love about living in a community in the South is that people have such strong kind of religious beliefs, and generosity is such a part of that, like a sense of love in our community. And so I hope that that would convince people that this is a way to show a community you love them by social distancing. And that didn't quite lead to any of the conversations that I hoped it would. I had a lot of people who didn't think it was that there was reason to be fearful yet. And that's because every community in rural America is kind of operating in its own boat, like this analogy you brought up. Yeah. Right? Every government leader has to make their own decisions. They have to kind of figure out their own reality. And so you could have to go to the next county to get your hair cut, and they have different rules than your county. Or you could have to go to the pharmacy 2 towns over, and they have different rules. So things are confusing. One other way things are confusing is the media markets here. Where I live, our one news channel is from Albany, where the story is really severe. Things are pretty intense, and there's a lot of reporting about those high death rates. The other channel, if I go to channel 4, it's the news from Columbus, which is where Fort Benning is. And unfortunately, Columbus has a really low COVID count compared to population, and they've put a number of practices in place. And so if one channel is telling you that locally the problem is bad. Another channel is telling you locally the problem is okay, but be cautious. What should you do where you live? It's just confusing.
This difference across rural communities, is this an ongoing problem? Do you think this is COVID in any way, shape, or form bringing uniformity across these communities, or no?
I don't think it is, and I think this where we live is not unique. I think there's probably pockets across the country, rural pockets, where the experience is different because the disease doesn't exist in the exact same way everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and so you shared a lot about, we've talked a lot about this lack of accurate information. And you shared how in your town, a key source has also been the radio, always, but that's now closed down. What about the public health website for your community? Is that an option for accurate information?
It hasn't been. We have information on there that's national based, and all politics are local, all public health is local. Unfortunately, not all communities have a big health department, and that's something I hadn't realized until I moved to a rural community. We have one amazing public health nurse. She's our whole public health department. How does she staff up? That's impossible. And I think it's just a gap that we have as a country, that low infrastructure.
And the time that she does have, she doesn't necessarily include the skills to update the website. So.
Right. I mean, that's not right. That wouldn't be a priority, especially because I don't think many people are searching the web for their local health department here. That's just not kind of you wouldn't think of that as your go-to source.
So where are people getting their news? You mentioned Facebook as a spot.
Yes. People are using Facebook. People are using their church groups because a lot of people get information through those. And so I'm hopeful that faith leaders will be able to share information about what's going on. One of our local authorities, the police chief, had been asking how he can share information with the community, figuring he's going to people's houses. He knows and has access in communities. So can he be an information source?
So I had a beautiful conversation yesterday with Tony Bach, whom you and I both know, a force in the palliative care space. And I was sharing that you had said that, and we talked about, is there a way for us to distribute out at the state level to police chiefs information? Because it resonated so strongly with me, and it did with him, that, what is a source of information that you can trust in your community? It is the police chief. And in these rural communities, they're out there and they know what's going on. And I love the idea, and you and I, let's follow up on and anyone who has ideas, please share how we could be using the police chief infrastructure, the police system, as a way to distribute accurate information, because at the core, it is all about safety and health, supporting love. So, I think the message that you always share is one that we don't get to hear a lot when we're off in our formal business world. If you worked with a health plan that had rural communities, what would you tell them to do?
I would say to reverse their nurse triage line and make them outbound functioning. Because I think a lot of people would appreciate a phone call, especially, older citizens. Most of my neighbors are 75 plus. And so a phone call to them to check on how they're doing and to answer their questions or tell them how the disease is progressing locally would be so impactful. Our local hospital administrator said that she is handing out information to people when she discharges everybody who gets discharged from the hospital. And I thought, right, because people like that piece of paper, they like that phone call that is direct information from a trusted authority. And the insurance plans could be that source for people.
Yeah, that's funny. And then you and I were talking about, and if there isn't enough capacity for a plan to do the blanket dialing, well, then call the police chief by the community, right? So you can find the distribution point within the community that could then serve like a waterfall to get the information out. And I loved that idea too. So Sarah, who you and I both know and love, who works with me at Archangels, she shared a story she heard yesterday about a caregiver needing respite so badly that she literally was like, I would put my loved one in a daycare right now if it existed, because this is so hard the way that people are living. And you've been doing this listening session with caregivers with whom you have a relationship, who are being supported by Rosalynn Carter Institute. Can you share a little bit, what are you hearing in these listening sessions in general, and then as it relates to the need for respite? And what does respite mean for people who don't know what that means?
Respite is a break in any form. For some people, that is their loved one going to a day facility. For some people, that's somebody coming over and sitting with a loved one, or spending time with them so that you could go out and get your hair cut. Go to a class at the gym, do the grocery shopping by yourself, whatever that looks like. It's that period of break that happens. And caregivers need that, and care recipients need that. A lot of times we think about it because it's important for the caregiver, but it's probably important for both people. As we're all learning with shelter-in-place orders, you love your loved ones, but maybe you need a break from them.
And
That's right. And so that structured respite is something that caregivers don't have right now, because maybe some of the facilities are closed that they would normally use, or those things that they do for that break, that time, that haircut, that trip to the grocery store can't be the same as it's always been. The other thing that we're hearing from caregivers is that one of the biggest challenges in caregiving is that it's a journey. It's like being in a cave where you don't know the exit. You don't know which direction to go, and you don't know when the light is going to show up at the end of the tunnel, or what that's going to look like. And so there's kind of this constant anxiety and mystery for some people. Well, right now, so many people feel the same way about COVID. So it's like having two categories of mystery that are just constantly with you. And so caregivers are feeling that pretty intensely. The other thing that they're feeling is that a lot of the guidance that comes out are things that many caregivers have to do every day. They have to be really vigilant about bringing germs into the house and making sure they've washed everything, making sure that they're recognizing when somebody's sick and keeping that sick person away from their loved one. And so what are the differences that a caregiver could be thinking about when it comes to COVID activities? How are the changes necessary for a caregiver in their day-to-day because of this new set of threats that are here? And then I think the other is caregivers feeling, as they often do, that they're not recognized. If there's somewhere between 40 or even 80 million caregivers right now in the US, I don't know about you, but I haven't seen very many messages or leaders talking about and talking to caregivers.
Yeah. But we're going to change that.
That's right.
So I keep hearing, as a sign of hope for all of us, that pandemics have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we talked about this, and you spoke to the challenges as an entrepreneur, therefore I would say opportunities of returning back to a functioning economy. Can you speak about that?
I think one thing that there is a lot of question for me when it comes to this turning back on that we all have optimism about is that for caregivers, that may not happen in a single and streamlined way. So your job may expect you to show back up at work, and the person who does some of the home care work that you rely on for your loved one may not be showing back up at work at the same time, or the daycare center that you use may not open at the same time when your boss is expecting you to show back up to work. What happens then? And how do we recognize that caregiving is a critical form of work and should be recognized as such? I think there's an opportunity. My optimism comes out here that I think this maybe caregiving will be seen in a different way, because there are so many people dealing with it, both because of COVID and other reasons right now.
Yeah, that double whammy.
Yeah.
So what would you say to any policymakers out there?
I would say that caregiving is a form of work. We wouldn't double book somebody from 9 to 2 at their job at a restaurant and at another restaurant at the same time. But we'd expect them to be thinking about their caregiving responsibilities and doing their work at the same time. So how do we kind of have that mindset, recognize the importance of caregiving and the value that it has on our economy, for our economy and for families, and infuse that into all of our policy decisions.
Yeah. So this really is, for all these reasons we're talking about, an unprecedented moment in time. And, I'm 48, and I would say that my generation has never lived through anything like this, right? We've never struggled through something that is this all encompassing and this terrifying. I never had to fight for my country. I never had to fight for the right to work. So you work hand in hand with Mrs. Carter. I wish we had like fancy things and I would have hearts explode over my head. You're talented at that stuff. And we talk about how she has really lived through hard times before. And so I said, will you please ask her what we can learn from the past on this? What did she say?
She had an answer more similar to you than you might think, because she said, this is an incredible moment in our time. We've never experienced something like this. People have so many elements of fear and uncertainty going on. And so how do we support people? How do we help people when maybe it's not as clear what that help needs to look like? But that this is a once in a lifetime experience. And, she, as we both know, she's been through many world altering experiences. So it's important to realize that for her, there was no analog.
Yeah, which is extraordinary. What would be a very surprising thing for people to learn about the Institute and Mrs. Carter?
I think first off, longevity. The Institute's been around for 33 years. How many people were thinking about caregiving 33 years ago? I think that's amazing, but it's not surprising. Mrs. Carter has been committed to family caregiving since she herself was 13. That's how long she's been committed to and recognizing the challenges of caregiving. And she's also had another passion in supporting people with mental health issues, another topic that's often kind of behind the scenes. And she's been doing that for almost 50 years. So I think people will be amazed to know her long-standing commitment to some of the most challenging issues of our time.
And, in some ways it's so beautiful because she's been a champion of this for so long. And there is a sense, you and I share this sense, that this could be the moment that we actually shift culture to recognize caregiving as the backbone of society that it is. Mm-hmm. So after 50 years of championing this space, what would she want?
I think the most basic thing that she always reminds me is she wants people to recognize the journey that everyone's on. I think that quote that you shared about everyone being in their own boat is so aligned with the caregiver journey. There is no single experience that a caregiver faces, but the one thing that all caregivers appreciate is being reached out to and connected with. And so that's something we can all do right now.
Yeah. A friend sent me, I think that's true across the population. And I think it can be especially true with, I'm going to use the word elders with great intent, because I think elders have long been our society's wisest source. And I think we've moved away from recognizing how freaking smart elders are and the value that they bring. A friend sent me the news the other day that John Prine had died. And you don't know about John Prine until you start realizing how many of his songs you listen to. And now I'm obsessed with him and his music. And my mom sent me a YouTube of his song, Hello in There. And I watched it. It had the lyrics on the bottom, so you could not miss a word. And the refrain is, you know that old trees just go stronger and old rivers grow wilder every day. Old people just grow lonesome, waiting for someone to say hello in there, hello, which I think is so beautiful. And then the part, old trees just go stronger, then it goes on and has this call to action, which I think is so reminiscent of Mrs. Carter and what you just said. So if you're walking down the street sometime and you spot some hollow, ancient eyes, please don't just pass them by and stare as if you didn't care. Say hello in there, hello. Which is just such a reminder. We walk around with our heads down. Right now, we're not walking around at all. So find a way to be reaching out. And then as we get slowly released, take a moment to be looking at people, especially those who you might not have seen before. And recognize that they're human, they're doing their part, they're stressed out, they're strung out. We can start by just being kind to each other. What a difference that in and of itself could make. So you have made caregivers your life. You have this extraordinary background that you bring with you. take all that together and share, what would you say to caregivers at this incredibly important moment in time?
I'd want caregivers to know that they aren't alone in this journey, that they might see, stories on the news of somebody explaining caregiving for the first time, and I imagine a little bit of an eye roll, like, come on, I've been at this for decades. But I want caregivers to know that we see them and we appreciate them, and that there are people out there working to support them.
Yeah. Would you say anything different to the caregivers who just became caregivers, this new population of, COVID caregivers, as we're calling them?
I would say a little bit of recognize that you aren't, it's similar, you're not alone, and that people have been serving in caregiving roles for quite some time. There are ways that it is considered one of the most rewarding opportunities of your life. And so while it might be challenging at various points, I think there's a recognition. I mean, I'd love to see more experienced caregivers serve in some sort of mentor way to people who are just entering this. Yeah. Because the best people who understand it are those who have been in it for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about resources? They can go to your website, for example. There are resources that exist to help.
That's right. That's right. There are resources, our rosalyncarter.org website. We have a number of partner organizations that we work with who are working like Archangels, and the important efforts to get the word out about caregivers, to identify resources for them, to make sure that information is more specific to the challenges that caregivers are facing in this time.
So to organizations like a health plan or an employer who are learning to support caregivers, what would you say to them?
Well, first I tell them to get involved in the Look, Love, Lift pledge that you have going on, because I think that recognition is important. I started out in this conversation, we talked about how I feel like caregivers aren't on top of the news, and I'd love to see that change for a variety of reasons. I would also say that everybody who a health plan might think of as a vulnerable population member in their plan has a +1. Everybody has, whether it's a person who is delivering food to them, who doesn't really have many interactions, to the person who's in that house with the person every day, pay attention to the +1.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful way to say it. What would you say to yourself?
I would say,
and you have to start by saying self.
I'm sorry?
You have to start by saying self.
Self? I would say this is an unprecedented time, which is bringing challenge and uncertainty to everybody, myself included. Small town, big town, a lot of questions. But I believe we will learn so much from this that will help people in the future. That this is an unprecedented time, but that doesn't mean it has to be a horrible time.
Yeah. And you said another thing to me about, let's not be naive about the extraordinary diversity that exists across the US. If you know one town, that doesn't mean you know another town. If you know one perspective, that doesn't mean you know another perspective.
That's
which
right.
I think is invaluable and is something that, you've been teaching me. And that I've seen play out over and over again, spending time at Walmarts across the country, spending time in communities across the country. And then close out with me with 3 things that you want everyone to do.
I would say I want everyone to call somebody. And I mean that in the most traditional sense. Pick up the phone, not a text. Share that voice and that love that you share through the phone with someone, and check on them. Because even if you're having a bad day, that's one way to come out of that better. Make a phone call to somebody, because they're probably struggling in some way as well. Yeah. The second is to exercise together but apart. I always say, if you're going to go for a walk, call a friend and exercise with them but without them right now. Because I think we all need some fresh air. And I think to live, I'd say, I'll use a word that you often use, with grace and purpose right now, that everybody is in their own journey, and it's tough, and to give everybody a little bit of breathing room in this most challenging time.
Yeah. There's so beautifully said. And I was speaking last night with a much younger, this younger generation, and we were brainstorming about all the things that we've just been describing. And they were talking about, as it comes to loneliness, how they're finding, and they're like that population, the extent to which voice is making such a difference. And I'm hearing, like in Europe, there's more and more, you record a message and you send it to someone as opposed to writing it. And I listened to these two beautiful young women describing how much more they get out of the voice. And maybe part of the beauty is we'll be returning back to these old modes of communication, like write a letter, right? Actually sit and write a letter. It challenges a different part of your brain. It opens a different part of your soul. So I'm going to take your three things and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to say, and let's also write a letter to somebody. You can write a thank you card to somebody for what they're doing. Jen, I love you madly. You're so extraordinary. What you're doing is extraordinary. You know, I want to come live with you and Mrs. Carter. If I could, I would. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your Saturday morning. And thank you to your neighbors for not playing Candy Crush right now. So we could do
Thank you.